I'm going to name off the stats of two IndyCar drivers, and tell me which one you would want on your team. Neither of them have wins, but driver 1 has raced one season in IndyCar and achieved 2 podiums, a pole position, and a 16th in the driver's standings, being Rookie of the Year. Driver 2, on the other hand, has 3.5 seasons in IndyCar, with 2 top 10 finishes and a highest of 20th in the standings across 3 different teams. Chances are you chose driver 1, which was Linus Lundqvist, and driver 2 was Stingray Robb, but if you notice, only one of these guys is in IndyCar today, and that's because of one stat I didn't mention: money. In the world of motorsport, pay drivers have existed from the very beginning, and they are a fundamental part of every domain of racing, so it's not like they're going anywhere. But as times have changed a bit, it begs the question: at what point does money override talent? Before I actually say anything more, I think it's important I define the term pay driver, because it's often used as a blanket term for a bunch of different things. A pay driver is not simply just someone who is rich and someone whose primary value to a team is the funding they bring, rather than their driving ability. And because of this, the spectrum is so huge as to what this covers. Take a look at F1 for 3 main types of pay drivers you'll see. They're the ones who bring huge backing from big sponsors, like Sergio Perez, who is massively funded by Telcel through a connection. There are also drivers who gain huge fund because of nationalism, and a great example of this is Zhou Guanyu, who was the first Chinese F1 driver and gained a huge backing of Chinese companies as a result of that. And finally, you have familial wealth drivers, like your Lance Strolls, your Nikita Mazepins, and your Nicholas Latifi's. These are drivers with just so much money from their families that they can fund their own seat off of that alone. The truth is, a lot more drivers than you think can be classified as pay drivers, and most fall somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, so the debate on the topic is rarely ever clean. But an important distinction to make is just because you bring in funding doesn't mean you're a terrible driver. Like I said, pay drivers have existed from the very beginning of motorsport, because structurally, it really just is like no other sport, where machinery just takes a huge responsibility. So it isn't just a modern problem, but it has lasted so long because teams back then needed the money, and so do teams today. I'm going to use IndyCar specifically to paint the picture. An engine lease for the season is roughly $2.9 million for one car alone, and to add personnel, travel, equipment, and facilities as expenses, you're looking at a huge number that could fall anywhere between $8 to $15 million, which is definitely not easy to come by. The leader circle in IndyCar does offer some funding though, being $1.645 million for the top 22 entries at the end of the season, but that's nowhere near enough to fund a season on its own. This is where traditional sponsorship from corporate sources would make its way in, but as much as it is around, it has declined recently. With tobacco money being gone, alcohol sponsors being restricted, and most companies having their own budget pressures, big sponsors aren't just popping up everywhere, so it has become more strategic. The reality is, most sponsors are tied to drivers themselves, and a driver bringing in an extra $3 to $5 million is the difference between racing and not racing for a lot of teams. To frame it better, a team choosing a pay driver over another more talented driver is not purely out of evil or greed, it genuinely is out of survival sometimes. Still looking specifically at IndyCar, it further restricts funding as it pertains to the US market primarily. This isn't saying that other countries can't watch it, or international sponsors aren't there, but it's just that they're less prevalent. For example, F1 teams can gain sponsors from around the globe, and companies see benefit. But IndyCar, it tightens the scope as to what is usually American companies marketing to American people. This has been attempted to be combated with the charter system, where it does help a bit, but it also creates a divide. A reason that you see the very top talent, even if they don't have funding, at top teams, is just because top teams have money. Penske, Andretti, McLaren, and Chip Ganassi Racing all just have more funds than the rest of the field. So even though they do just fine, the other teams are permanently fighting for survival. For example, Stingray Robb, who I mentioned earlier, has driven for AJ Foyt, Dale Coyne, and Hunkos Hollinger, and brought significant funds to each of them. These teams are constantly fighting for survival and turn to pay drivers instead of others because they need to stay afloat. This is also a massive reason as to why top-tier talent can't always find a top-tier ride. Drivers like Rinus VeeKay have just floated around waiting for an opportunity, and others like Linus Lundqvist can't find any ride altogether. This all has to do with the somewhat cruel irony of the situation, that the teams that are most likely to give these drivers a shot are the ones that are most dependent on paid drivers. And when those teams don't turn to paid drivers, they could implode from the inside out, just like we saw with Prema. Prema was a European-based team with little American appeal for sponsors, and the drivers they chose, although talented, had no American sponsor appeal either. If they likely turned to a driver that could support the team financially, or even pull in sponsors, we might have seen him in the paddock this year. There obviously were a bunch of other problems going on behind the scenes with Prema, so it's not a perfect example, but you get the point. Specifically, we can look at genuine examples of this. A few years ago, Linus Lundqvist lost his seat when Ganassi was downsizing because of charters, and Kiffin Simpson got the seat over him because of funding. Guys like Rinus VeeKay and Connor Daly never find a team for more than a year or two because they don't have the financial backing to sign a multi-year contract, yet others do. The pattern emerges through all of it, that genuinely talented drivers without significant backing end up in a doom cycle, while drivers with the money get multi-year, stable contracts. When you look at it from a human standpoint, you want careers to be defined by talent, not money. But it just doesn't work that way. Now, what I don't want to do is villainize pay drivers, because they are a large part of motorsport as a whole. Most of them know exactly where they stand and do have some decent results. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the series wouldn't exist, or at least to the same level, without pay drivers. There are a large majority of quote-unquote pay drivers who entered their respective series and done well enough that people just forgot about that pay driver moniker. For example, Niki Lauda is one of the most decorated drivers in the world, yet he paid his way into F1 with BRM through bank loans. And from there, he made his way up the ranks to Ferrari, who famously paid off his loans once he started doing well. Obviously, this isn't the case for all of them to be multi-champions, but looking at IndyCar, it was said that Marcus Armstrong had significant funds being pumped into his ride at Ganassi, but based on performance, he has been pretty solid to the point that he could easily get a seat based off of merit alone. But anyways, without pay drivers of any sort, no domain of motorsport would really be the same. Multiple teams just wouldn't exist at all, meaning the grid would be smaller, and therefore there would be less opportunity for those said talented drivers anyway. So if anything, pay drivers are actually creating more opportunity in a weird way. As it stands, although it may seem like pay drivers should just not be a part of the sport, it's really a complicated trade-off rather than a simple injustice. Now, the simple answer for if pay drivers will ever disappear is that it's very, very unlikely. Prize money in IndyCar and F1 simply just don't scale to eliminate the gap in funding, considering expenditures for motorsport are just so high. Therefore, sponsors have to do a majority of the pulling, yet even they are becoming more scarce. With IndyCar pertaining to a domestic market, they're already in a tightened market, and F1 pulls a majority of said sponsors. The charter system in IndyCar kinda helps the situation, but not really. It just creates a bit of a divide in the teams that struggle and those who don't. As for F1, driver academies also do help develop talent and get them in the car, but they don't tend to solve the problems for the mid-tier teams, mostly just the top team. It also doesn't help that junior motorsport categories are only going up in cost year by year, which I feel isn't talked about enough. So there already is a natural filtering process as to which drivers can and can't afford it. The main point is, as long as racing in any capacity usually needs outsourced funds to function properly, and that funding is necessary for survival, pay drivers will always be around. As it stands, as much as it may suck to see your favorite driver miss out on a seat because of a pay driver, they're not the problem. It's that motorsport literally can't function without them. It's one of the only sports in the world where equipment prices are so high and matter so much, and despite growing audiences in the past years, they most likely will never have the commercial profile that's big enough to fully fund teams and give them a safety net. No matter how big these sports grow or the heights they reach, it's just so different with the model that they have that it's like no other. The pay driver problem everyone seems to have does not necessarily fall within the fault of them. It's honestly not a problem to begin with. It's a structurally embedded system to keep teams afloat and therefore create more opportunity. You just kinda need to peer through the lines to see that.